Welcome to our APS-JSPG Science Policy Writing Workshop. It's March 6, 2023. My name is Julianne McCall. I am the Director of Programs and Events at JSPG. My day job is in the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research. I'm co-director of Precision Medicine. I am joined by a stellar group of truly not just national but world leaders in the science and technology policy space, who I will introduce briefly. We are looking ahead at a 2-hour program. The first half is roughly dedicated to, I'm sorry if you're seeing double here. First half is roughly dedicated to our keynote speakers, Dr. Sam Howerton and Dr. Reba Bandyopadhyay, who will be joining shortly, followed by opportunities for you all to engage in small group discussion with additional experts who will be who are on the call here, Dr. Divyansh Kaushik, as well as Ivan Kanapathy as he joins. So we are absolutely thrilled by the level of interest. This meeting, as you'll see, is being recorded. It will be uploaded within a week or two to the JSPG Journal of Science Policy and Governance YouTube channel. We will welcome your chats, your questions in the chat. If you absolutely need to interrupt the keynote talks, please raise your hand. If there's a moment where we'll pause and take your question, we will, but please do save it for during the discussion if you possibly can. I am delighted to hand it over to the American Physical Society Forum on Physics and Society, current president and incoming president, or chair, sorry, Dr. Henry Kelly, the outgoing president. Henry, I know that you are in the wilderness. I'm impressed by your Wi-Fi network signal. As well as Dr. Anna Kiter. Anna, I would love to hand it to you to provide an introduction to APS FPS.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julianne, for that introduction. I'm Anna Kiter, and I'm the chair-elect of the Forum on Physics and Society. So we are an interest group within the broader American Physical Society, and our focus is very general. It is on providing educational resources to physicists and policymakers and the general community on any issue at the intersection of physics and society. So as you would imagine, that covers quite a swath of science policy and quite a swath of issues facing our society and facing the community. We were created in 1971 around issues of nuclear weapons and nuclear nonproliferation. But again, we now cover all the issues where physics and society overlap. We're so pleased to be sponsoring this special issue on global security with the Journal on Science Policy and Governance, and we thank them so much for their partnership in this issue. I would say if you can't get enough of physics and society, I encourage you to register for the APS Forum on Physics and Society newsletter. It comes out quarterly, and it is appropriately titled Physics and Society. You can find it by Googling, or I think a link will be available perhaps in the follow-on materials. I also want to join JSPG in expending a wonderful, warm thank you to all of our panelists today. We're really fortunate to have your expertise guiding our potential authors on their journey on working on this issue. Thank you again, and it's really just an honor to be here with you all today.
Dr. Kiter, thank you so much for representing APS FPS as well as for the partnership. It's truly an honor for us to go into spreading fabulous ideas and sharing a window into the world of top-level decision makers. So thank you again to you and as well as Henry for your thoughtful and creative cooperation as we develop this series of events. Let me, oh dear Lord. too many windows open at the moment. For those of you new to the Journal of Science Policy and Governance, we are now over 10 years old. We're thrilled to be an internationally recognized open access peer-reviewed science publication. We like to serve as a vehicle, especially for students and early career scholars and researchers, to explore and contribute to the world of science and technology policy. We are an independent platform to engage and bolster writing credentials, as well as encourage students and early career scholars and researchers to learn about the worlds of science and technology policy. In addition to the journal, we also provide professional development opportunities, including professional development webinars, workshops exactly like this one, as well as resources and career development, including a certificate program that's not currently offered, but will likely be offered over the next year or two, opportunities to engage as an editorial board member, as well as an ambassador program, our flagship internship opportunity. I should mention I'm joined today by two JSPG staff members. They are ambassadors Layla Chittick of UCLA and Bipin Kumar of Toronto. And I want to give them all the credit for making today's event possible. We recognize that publishing information is typically not good enough in moving the needle, especially in policy. So we want to be able to support our authors with opportunities to present their work following publication. For example, this UK SIN event, conference panels via a podcast that we relaunched last year as part of our 10-year anniversary, as well as media engagement, writing up press releases, and connecting you with science journalists around the nation and around the world. Without further ado, as I hope you've all seen, this is the first event of a series for our special issue leading up to the April 30th deadline. This is our more hands-on workshop, a 2-hour long, followed by 2 virtual expert panels, one of which has already been announced, and you can see that Sherry Goodman and Bill Bonvillian, 2 luminaries in the field of global security, will be joining us in a couple of weeks on March 21st, as well as our final webinar on specifically on foreign policy and national security. So please do refer to the JSPG events webpage to register for those events already. As you well know, this special issue on policy and governance on science, technology, and global security was announced last month. Actually, I think it was mid-January already. It's a month and a half ago now, with a submission deadline fast approaching on April 30th. So please do build the confidence and submit your wonderful ideas. And the idea of having our experts join us today is to validate what topics are at the forefront of the discussion in the policy world, and to give you the opportunity to learn how the experts think about policy ideas and craft solutions and papers. So without further ado, I see that our first keynote speaker, Dr. Sam Howerton, has joined. Pardon me, has joined us, and I am glad to provide an introduction. Dr. Sam Howerton serves as Chief Scientist of the Department of Homeland Security here in the United States. Dr. Howerton works on the hardest problems at the intersection of research and national security. He applies critical thinking to problems that cross policy and disciplinary boundaries using his skills in research administration, emerging technology, diplomacy, and national security. Dr. Howerton received his PhD in chemistry and environmental toxicology at Michigan State University and worked across different scientific departments studying how carcinogenic pollutants interact with soil. He received a Stanford LEAD pardon me, not a light bulb, an LEAD, a lead corporate innovation certificate at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Dr. Howerton served as team lead for global engagement at the U.S. Department of State from 2011 to 2013. He was hired as an outsider to lead a reorganization and stood up a new division to develop and implement international programs. These programs promoted science as a tool for economic growth and provided training and mentorship to aspiring entrepreneurs and scientists in countries with significant Muslim communities. Dr. Howerton, it's an incredible privilege to welcome you to our first event of this special issue series. I'll hand the microphone now to you.
All right, thank you very much for the introduction. And my face always turns red when people talk about me. I think it's just the way that I was raised. So I want to start by just saying, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, wherever you may be. I know that there are people joining us across here in the United States, but also globally as well. So I'm going to talk with you today a little bit about 21st century opportunities at the intersection of science and national security, which is where I've built my career over the past 20 years in government. And I understand from kind of listening to the introduction today and talking to some of the organizers ahead of time that what the group listening in is probably interested in the topics that are kind of at the forefront of thought for those of us in government and how you can kind of inform the work that we do. So it's my intent to not only answer those questions, but more importantly, to provide some context, the why, as I like to call it, about why are the things that are important the way why they are, because that's really the stuff that's the most important, I think, for science to understand is it's not just an academic problem for us. There's actually a tremendous amount of context that shapes the policies that we're required to kind of think about and implement as we seek solutions. So let me do some level setting just so that we all kind of start from the same place. The first thing that I want to talk about is what is national security, right? And this may sound pretty esoteric, but it's really important because from my experience, national security is a pretty subjective sort of assessment. A lot of it depends upon where you are, both geographically, but also intellectually, right? Also your experiences, right, that from your education, but also your life can really shape where you are. And so as I think about my time working in this sphere, national security encompasses kind of three big sorts of areas, right? There's the physical security of the nation that we reside in. There's the ability to kind of project military force overseas in defense of kind of what we think is important. And then there's certainly the economic interest as well. And that includes what the private sector is working on since they are the engine, of the global marketplace. But national security also includes these kind of more esoteric sorts of subjective assets of like, what are values? What are those beliefs that you think are important to you, that are important to the society that you belong to? And where do you want that to go? And so national security is this really complex framework. And for those of us working in government, where we sit within government makes a very big difference in how we look at it. So I certainly work in a national security agency, one charged with Homeland Defense. We tend to take a security angle looking through it. If you were to go talk to some of my colleagues over at Health and Human Services, they would look at it more through a health lens, right? But all of those things do encompass the totality of what national security is. Now, national security is not just governed by what's going on inside any given country here in the United States, right? There's this large series of geopolitical influences that are also affecting how we view it. And one of the ways that I always like to think about it is through a historical lens. So I'm not going to lie, right? As a chemist, I didn't take a lot of history, but in the job that I'm at, I've become much more of a scholar of it because it really shapes, I think, your understanding of where we've come as a nation. So if I think back like just to the beginning of the 20th century for the United States, and then project that forward to now, what I see is a radical transformation in the way that we think about national security. At the beginning of the 20th century, the US was a very introspective nation. We had just fought the Civil War a few decades earlier. We had the Industrial Revolution, which was underway, and our society was transforming itself. Now, I hold no illusions, right? Our society was highly stratified. It was highly segregated, right? Economic wealth was not evenly distributed. And so in 1914, and you're going to hear trains in the background because that's where I work, near some train tracks. When 1914 came about, that's when World War I started. And the US position, its national security position, was one of neutrality. we provided a little financial resources to the Allies, but it wasn't until 1917 that the US changed the way that it viewed national security. And that was really due to two external factors, right? We had a release of what's called the Zimmermann telegram, which was a piece of British intelligence. And then there were also attacks on our maritime assets by U-boats. And so those things inflamed our public and led right to the United States entering the war. But our national security, kind of like a rubber band, shrank back after the war, and we returned to an isolationist posture, to include the passage of what was called the Neutrality Act of 1935, which tried to prevent the United States from getting involved in any more wars like the one that had occurred just a decade ago. But just like World War I, we were drawn into the Second World War through an external event, the attack at Pearl Harbor. And once again, that changed public sentiment to the fact that we engaged with the war and with allies successfully won it. But what was interesting about national security as a concept was this almost inversion of the way that we came out of that war. Instead of returning to an isolationist policy, we found ourselves in a world now where there was another great superpower, the Soviet Union. And so we became more interventionist in the way that we prosecuted national security outside of our own borders. We created things like NATO, right, which are an international order to kind of lead to mutual defense. And a lot of those sorts of international constructs, both diplomatically and militarily, continue to this day. And then toward the end of the 20th century, we saw national security actually evolve again to begin to take on facets of globalization, which is an aspect of economic security, right? Under the assumption that if we are more interdependent upon one another, the likelihood of war expanding as it had in the first half of the 20th century was less likely to occur. And now, maybe jumping forward today, we see even more evolution in the way that we think about it. Globalization is changing. Now we talk about things like national technological advantage, investing in capabilities indigenous to the United States, where we want to make sure that we have capabilities that at one point were perhaps the sole resource external. And a great example of that are the investments under the CHIPS Act leading to new fabrication facilities for semiconductors, or the desire to increase our ability to produce certain therapeutics or vaccines here indigenously. So you might say, well, why have we gone across that kind of span of history? I talk about that because it's an arc, and it's an arc that we continue to be on. And today we are going to talk a little bit about some of the areas I think that are important, which hopefully will kind of continue for the next decade or two, but are likely to be once again kind of subsumed as the world around us changes. Now, this list is by no means exhaustive, and it's not really probably prioritized, even though you'll hear, I think, people such as myself or others in the United States talk about them a lot. And the reason is that these external factors that we find ourselves, that are impressing upon us can change on any given day, on any given week, and require us to shift rather radically and quickly. But I think one topic that we've been working on, that we're going to continue to working on, is really the effect of climate change. And that spans a large number of issues. So in the physical world, we certainly are worried about natural disasters that are becoming more frequent and the damage for them more costly. Understanding kind of how climate is changing, what it's doing to those sorts of disaster cycles, are helping agencies such as FEMA, which is part of DHS, to think about how we do risk frameworks. How do we predict where problems will occur? How do we pre-position assets to them to make sure that we help the American citizens when those events unfold? At the same time, climate change is going to affect how we protect the United States. We're going to see increased melting of the Arctic and the Antarctic. It's going to lead to coastal inundation. It's going to change how and where our military might be called on to operate in the future. Scientists and engineers at the Department of Defense have to think about what sort of materiel are our forces going to need to operate in that future state. What are the effects on human performance going to be in these new sorts of environments? How much is it going to cost? How quick do we have to develop them? Those are the sorts of questions from a more military sort of way of thinking of national security. But at the same time, as we think about the Arctic melting in particular, those in the US Coast Guard have to think about new lanes of commercial transit that'll come down from Asia or across from perhaps Russia. And what does that mean for lawful versus unlawful commercial trade? What happens when ships perhaps become stranded? The distances are larger in those areas. The capabilities of our current search and rescue will need to adapt. And scientists and engineers have a big role to play in making sure those sorts of capabilities are developed. And then maybe last, moving from kind of the physical sciences sorts of aspects of climate change into the social sciences, what is the impact of climate change going to do to individuals and groups? We ask questions like, what will movement inside the United States look like? Will we see people move away from areas prone to fire or floods? Will we see people moving from other countries, moving toward our borders? And how will that affect our ability to respond? What sort of resources do we need to ensure the humane treatment of those individuals? These are the sorts of questions that science and engineering have an important role to play as we think about climate change and its intersection with national security. So pivoting maybe to a slightly different topic then that's equally important is really the influence of the digital world on society. So we all live in an analog world that is shaped daily, almost probably minute by the digital. We carry around phones, we use computers. Those sorts of things are very obvious to us. But beneath that kind of obvious layer is another, right? That provide water and power, or the reliability of global positioning for cars, or the secure communications between financial institutions. Those underlying networks and infrastructure are prime targets for adversaries. You have people that are engaging in nuisance attacks, but you also see the deliberate targeting of critical services as a tool of war, especially in Ukraine right now. So understanding that digital world, how it interfaces with the physical one, and hardening it are extremely important to those of us in government as we try to make sure that we protect our citizenry and the lifestyles that they currently enjoy. Also in the digital realm is the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning, both for positive and nefarious purposes. So if any of you use TikTok, which we can't on our government computers anymore, right, or Instagram or anything with these sorts of filters, what you've probably noticed recently, right, is a real transformation in the type of AI ML tools, right, in terms of filters. We're seeing a lot more use of GANs, generated adversarial networks, right, that can make people look different. And that's an area of tremendous concern to here in the government, because it not only allows people to use those sorts of GANs for deep fakes, which can be used to spread misinformation, but are actually being used as online tools for revenge against individuals or groups. And so how do we understand those tools? How do we detect them? And then how do we actually leverage them for positive experiences, like decreasing the amount of time that you need, say, at an airport or border crossing, so that you can move more seamlessly through it. A third area of interest to those of us here in Homeland Defense, Homeland Security, are transnational criminal organizations. So these organizations come in all sorts of types and levels of sophistication. On one level, you have organizations like Hive, who are using ransomware to extort money from hospitals and schools. On the other end, you have cartels like the Sinaloa cartel, who specialize in the manufacture and sale of illicit drugs, to include fentanyl, which is killing over 100,000 Americans a year right now. Science and engineering has a role in understanding how these organizations are structured, what their business processes are, how to track their money, and more recently, understanding the patterns of life that give us fuller pictures of them. That allows us to identify their vulnerabilities, eventually arrest them, and then dismantle the networks to prevent them from doing their bad deeds. So a final example is what I like to call the kitchen sink example. And I think this is the one where individuals such as myself really enjoy working with the professional societies and members of the academic community. And it's the kitchen sink, I call it the kitchen sink priority, because it's how are critical and emerging technologies going to affect us, both at an individual level and a societal level. We don't know where the frontier of science is. We don't have, I think, the time to kind of live in that space, but all of you do. And knowing how those advances that are at the bleeding edge of discovery can be applied to these complex societal problems is an area of ripe exploration for us. from advanced computing at the edge to novel material development and manufacture. Knowing where something will go from the transition from of academic interest to societal utility is really important. And the more that you can share that perspective with us, I think the better off we all are. So I want to kind of now narrow it down a little bit more and think about the future. And this is the part of my job that I always like the best, because it allows me to use all of that kind of critical thinking that you learn in graduate school and postdoc and afterwards, and really apply it to think about where the world could be and drive it toward a more positive outcome. So areas that I think are really ripe for interest or for exploration, both technically and in terms of policy, include things like biotechnology and biological data. I just talked a little bit about climate change, how it's affecting people, but food crops, migration, human health to novel manufacturing. Biotechnology is going to touch each of these areas. And as much as I like to think that semiconductors and transistors and kind of the physical world was the remit of the 20th century, I really think that at the end of the 21st, we're going to look back and say that biotechnology was the same for this one. And that's both good and bad, because as we begin to understand the biological world better, and we bring better and better in silico, that is, high performance computing capabilities to merge with it, we really have the opportunity to understand the world in which we live to positive benefit. But that also carries kind of the secondary edge, right, of malaction, because just as we can understand biology better today, you can order up bespoke biological materials online. And in this kind of environment, I worry about things that could devastate our agricultural sector, or the development of new tools that could be used for new forms of genocide. These sorts of things are not just, I think, the realm of science fiction anymore. I think that they are likely to be used in this decade. And the more that the scientific community can help us get ahead of that, both in terms of technical capability and policy, the better prepared we will be for the use of those sorts of actions. And a second area that I think I worry a lot about is something that I call computational propaganda. So I like to think that I am a young man, but I'm not. I have 2 young kids, and probably like most of those others who have children, your children spend almost all of their time on the internet in one shape or other, and they're consuming information online. Information that is honestly not filtered very often, and whose provenance is difficult to discern. As I look at kind of the new AI transformer technologies that are coming out of the private sector, I do worry about the future where information can be shaped and packaged in a number of ways that not only misinform, but actually manipulate individuals and groups to actions that are detrimental to our society. Here in the United States and in a few other countries across the globe, we've seen, I think, the tip of the iceberg on these sorts of tools, and they're only going to get better as they become more refined, as their training sets become more advanced, and they become more accessible to the average person. How do we fix those threats, right? How do we create trusted sources of information and people? These are the sorts of complex policy questions that need to be informed by science that we're wrestling with right now. And I'll be candid with you, I don't have a really good answer to any of them. Third, and perhaps maybe last, at least for this discussion today, an area that I am becoming more interested in is what I call the shared threat surface area. So like most governments, the United States is kind of segmented in very defined ways. We have defense, we have homeland security, we have transportation. But the world we live in doesn't see those kind of boundaries any more than I think science sees the traditional disciplinary boundaries that existed in departments, decades ago. You can imagine the same way that I can that, in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to be living in a world where there are automated cars that are not only taking us to and from work, but communicating with each other and with built infrastructure. These systems have to work not only as standalone units, but part of a larger ecosystem. Whose responsibility is it to protect that ecosystem? Well, certainly those of us in DHS have a role, but so do our colleagues in the Department of Transportation. And I would even hazard to say those in the academic and private sectors as well, as you begin to develop these systems that will eventually integrate together into the ecosystem. Unwinding that kind of challenging landscape technologically and policy and how it affects these societal level use cases is not just an interesting academic exercise, but one with real world consequence. So I've been talking for a little while. Let me talk a little bit at the very end here about what I think you can do to help. So I've just given you kind of a very thin veneer of the problem set that we're interested in. And there's more to it. But what you can do is, one, find what interests you, and then come and find those of us in government and share your perspectives. There are not a lot of scientists and engineers working in the policy space in the US government. And we can take all of the help that we can. The sorts of things that are important for us are for you to help us work in analyzing the problem, and then most importantly, helping us identify solutions. These are messy problems, so we are expecting messy solutions. It's not a controlled laboratory environment. So by working through APS or other professional societies, I think you have a really great opportunity to take your expertise, your novel thinking, and provide it back to us in government. I'd also say too that to the maximum extent possible, get out and talk to your fellow citizens as well. I think we can all understand and agree that if the pandemic taught us nothing, it's that the level of scientific understanding is probably not where we had expected it to be, and certainly not where we wanted it to be. And so the more that you can get out with your local communities, share your understanding, and meet them where they are, I think the better off we'll all be in kind of shaping policy and science to meet their everyday needs. And lastly, I'm always going to make a plug. You're more than welcome to come join us, whether it's here in the United States or with your own government, wherever you may be, whether it's for a career like my own or a chapter in your career. We really do welcome new ideas and new perspectives. And I think that it's extremely instructive for people to see how systems work inside, and let's be candid, how maybe they don't work, right? By kind of getting off the bench and joining the scrum. And I'll be candid with you, I love this job. I think there's nothing else I would rather be doing than this. So let me end by thanking you all for the opportunity to speak to you today. And thank you for all that you're doing. Progress at a macro level is really measured at discrete steps at the micro. And that's what all of the work that you are doing. And I am deeply appreciative for the time and energy that you're investing to kind of help all of us get to the future that we want. So let me turn it back over to the organizers now.
Dr. Howerton, thank you so much for this clear-minded, eloquent overview of an extremely intense field in science and technology, policy and governance right now. We couldn't have dreamt of a better leader to provide an introduction and an overview. So thank you for your time. It's a testament to your commitment to workforce development and bringing in new voices that you would choose to spend your time with us today. We recognize how busy you are and how important your work is. So I'd like to invite Dr. Kiter, Dr. Kelly to thank our keynote speaker as well before we turn it over to our next keynote speaker. Anna, Henry, would you like to chime in?
I think you said it perfectly. Thank you so much. And I think that I didn't say this in my opening, but I hope it's very clear from Dr. Howerton's remarks, just because the American Physical Society is sponsoring this special issue, we are hopeful that we will see articles spanning the science and technology and innovation space, social science, chemistry, biology, all of it, ecology. It's really an all hands on deck issue. Global security is really, it takes all of the sciences working together. Of course, we think physics has a very important role to play, but it's certainly not singular in that role. So please, anyone who's a biologist or somebody on there, don't think that you can't submit for this because you're not a physicist. This is open to all the sciences. And thank you again, Dr. Howerton. It was really, I've been in this field for a long time and I still learned a lot from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kiter. Dr. Kelly, would you like to share some comments?
Sure. Well, thank you, Dr. Howerton. That was a superb overview of an incredibly deep and complicated subject. And just to add to the remark that Anna made, we're looking at this issue is potentially looking at national security implications for the U.S., but also for countries around the world who face many of the same problems that Dr. Howerton talked about. In fact, all of them. And so this is truly a global challenge, and we sort of look forward to people who can help bring that perspective. But I think that Howerton's overview was superb. I mean, you really did cover the rich and complicated dimensions of how science is affecting society locally, nationally, internationally, at all levels. So thank you again.
Okay, and with that, Dr. Howerton, we couldn't be more appreciative. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'm now going to turn it over to our next keynote speaker, Dr. Reba Bandyopadhyay, is Deputy Executive Director of the U.S. President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and Legislative and Science Policy Analyst for the National Science Board of the National Science Foundation, specializing in congressional relations, national science and engineering policy, and strategic communication. Dr. Bandyopadhyay stewarded the development and dissemination of the 2020 and 2022 editions of Science and Engineering Indicators. Previously, she was a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Executive Branch Fellow at the NSF and an American Physical Society Congressional Fellow in the office of Senator Brian Schatz. Prior to her pivot into policy, Dr. Bandyopadhyay served as research faculty in the Department of Astronomy at the University of Florida, as well as a postdoctoral and graduate researcher focused on observations of star systems containing a black hole or a neutron star in our Milky Way galaxy. She has also been appointed a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Dr. Bandyopadhyay, I turn the microphone to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I hope you can hear me. And now we're going to do the cute tech trick of seeing whether or not my screen share actually works. So let's see if this, all right, I've got host disabled participant screen sharing.
Well, that was kind of us, wasn't it? Let me make you
either re-enable it or you can share, but it's up to you either way.
Let me make you a co-host. If you could please try now. Apologies for those settings.
Sure. Excellent. All right. Let's see if. Okay, this is going to take the multi-step process of. Okay, now you can see. I don't know what you can see. What can you see?
Oh, we can see your notes as well as the
All right.
screen.
Can you see the? Are you now seeing the actual presentation?
We see the notes.
All right, then let me see. Then hang on a second. One more. Let me swap. How's this?
Perfect. Yes, full screen presentation mode. Thank you so much.
All right. All right. So thank you for asking me today to be here. I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to talk to a bunch of aspiring policy folks. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to start with I'm going to do something that I had to learn in the process of starting to do policy. And I've been doing this. It did not start off this way. So this is not a natural thing for me. And I had to learn it as I was working in this field. And that is that I'm going to start with, to reflect the principles that I'm about to offer, I'm going to start by using one of them, which is bottom line up front. Okay, so these are going to be on this slide, I'm going to talk about the sort of 5 basic things that I'm going to go through in the talk. The first one is that to write effective science policy, the first thing I'd like to say is you need a clear statement of their goal or objective. What's the outcome that you're looking for? What is the thing that you want to achieve, right? That needs to be as clear as possible and preferably as brief as possible. But basically think about what it is that you want, that you're trying to make happen, and then write that down. So the second thing is, and this is before you get into all the other stuff, you have to know your audience, right? Who are you trying to get to do something? Because that really is important, because you need to know how you're going to write what you're at in the policy, and also what you're going to do to ask them, what you're going to ask them to do. The specifics around it actually are related to who the people that you're asking. And you want to motivate them to want to do the thing that you want to do, right? which is that you need to write to meet their needs and interests. And then the next thing is bottom line up front. And that's what I was just saying. Like, I'm putting the bottom line up front on this slide, right? Which is to concisely provide the goal and objective and proposed actions first. So like, if you're writing a policy paper, if you're giving a talk, if you're writing anything in this space or doing something, don't sort of make people wait to find out what your goal is and what action you want them to take. That should be like sort of the first thing you tell them. And then choose your policy tools thoughtfully. So this is the next thing. As you think about, you have a goal, you have an objective, right? But there's a lot of different ways to get to that goal potentially. And so, you really need to think about all the different possibilities that there might be, and you may need to incorporate more than one in what you're thinking about, or give people multiple avenues for getting to the thing that you want to do. Or, depending on who you're speaking to, different actors have different abilities to act on different ways, right? So you potentially need different tools that you're offering to different people to get to the actual goal that you want. And finally, the last thing I would say that I want to make sure everybody, takes away is that whatever you do when you're writing or speaking about policy, you need to make the thing that you're putting forward memorable and relevant to them. If it's a policy paper, right? So there's a gazillion policy papers in DC. And how do you get somebody to remember yours? Remember that and to come along with you on the goal that you're trying to achieve. You need to provide them with something that is a hook for them, that is memorable for them, right? So that could be an illustrative narrative, it could be a story, it could be an example that's related to some place that they know about or something they care about, right? And that has to come along with the data and the facts. Okay, so you really need to think, a lot of this writing effective science policy is actually putting yourself in the shoes of the people you're trying to talk to, and then thinking about that as you write that out in whatever form it comes. And part of the reason for this is a real goal of all policy writing is to recruit allies, to build coalitions of people who want to get to the goal that you want to get to, and to get buy-in from the actors and the people who you're going to need to help create a policy, to actually put something forward and then implement it, right? To create both momentum and then an ability to accomplish that goal and to get the policy enacted. So a lot of people, a lot of entities have to come together and agree that something is worth doing in the policy space. That means non-governmental entities putting together a policy proposal, Congress folk coming together on legislation, executive branch agencies and leadership enacting policy or making policy, the White House and offices like OSDP, and often to make something happen, you need all of the above. So that's really why you need to put forth the same policy idea, sometimes in different formats over and over, tailored with tailored narratives that actually meet the needs of the various people you're talking to at the time, right? So this is like the kind of take home, this slide here is the kind of a take home, like 5 points on writing effective science policy. So I'm just going a little bit more detail into each of them. So, but will start with what is science policy? And you may have had this a little bit earlier, and you may all know this from classes or things that you've been doing, but I like to use the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship sort of mantra of policy for science and science for policy. And Wikipedia has actually not a bad little description of what that is, which is that science policy is public policy that is concerned with policies that affect the conduct of science and the research enterprise, which includes funding and other kinds of things, but also sort of policy implementation. But it also does the opposite, which is science policy also refers to applying scientific knowledge and consensus to the development of public policies writ large, which means, public policies that aren't necessarily specifically about science. So you kind of have both directions, and science policy as a phrase tends to encompass both of these things, this whole domain of issues that involve the social and natural sciences. And the idea here is that the goal is to consider how science and technology can serve the public. Okay, so then the question is, well, who writes science policy, right? And I like to think of it maybe in a kind of, to use some borrowed recent terminology of both enactors and influencers, right? There are both types of people who are involved in writing or putting together science policy. So when you think about enactors, this is people like the White House, which includes the executive offices of the president, of which OSTP is one. Bodies like the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, so that's a federal advisory committee, and there's many federal advisory committees throughout different agencies in the government. A federal advisory committee is an influencer on an enactor being the White House. Now, the White House also develops its own policies, right? So they are doing both roles. Similarly, executive branch agencies enact policy, but they also have influencers, so federal advisory committees, the National Science Board, policy offices within the executive branch agencies. But then you have, and of course, Congress. I didn't fail to put them on the slide for reasons that escape me, but they are also both enactors and influencers in policy, right? So then you have people who are more or less purely, influencers. And that includes organizations, professional societies, right? So people, and then things like the national academies who write on behalf of, often at the behest of Congress or at the behest of a federal agency, write great big long treatises that kind of lead in policy directions. American Academy of Arts and Sciences is another one. There are think tanks, places like Brookings, AEI, other places that develop policy papers. Professional societies and organizations, so APS or the AAAS or any number of other professional organizations, the American Association of Universities, right? There's all of those, so that we talk about education, STEM education societies. There's a lot of organizations, non-governmental organizations that write policy papers and put forth policy ideas, right? There are nonprofit foundations, that's more in some fields than in others, but there are plenty of those that also put forward policy ideas and proposals. There are, academics, of course. So, with not just within the context of university associations, but academics themselves who put forward, not just in public policy or in political science departments, but they put forward ideas for, based on data and evidence for policies for government at any level. It doesn't have to be federal, right? It could be state and local. And then there are consulting firms like places like McKinsey that do, that kind of do reviews and put forward sort of big policy ideas, as they look at a landscape, say like healthcare or, kind of the pandemic or whatever, like here are things that we need to think about. So these are all places where science policy could get written. And, DC is a small town in any particular area of expertise. So once you find your way into this ecosystem, you start running into the same people over and over again, as some of my friends on this Zoom know. And so, a lot of the people in the ecosystem start off as AAAS fellows, and you get to know people pretty quickly. And this networking, this interchange of people and ideas is actually very critical to how policy gets made, right? Because it's the networking of the people and the relationships between them that help policy ideas to disseminate through all the different places and actors that might be able to help move an agenda forward. So now going through that that slide, the first things in the first couple of slides, the first slide there, the 5 things. The first is, goals and outcomes, right? So when you think about writing your goal, one thing you want to do, thinking about what's your desired outcome and make sure it's not 15 things, right? It's hard to get a laundry list of things accomplished. So what is the one or two main things that you're trying to do? And a lot of that is the purpose of that outcome or that policy that you want to do, not just like the nitty gritty details, but what is it that you're trying to achieve, right? And then that, as you do that, as you write these things, there's sort of 3 things you need to take in mind. One is to be clear, right? So make sure when you write kind of a policy statement, a statement of what your desired outcome is, you're avoiding jargon. It's understandable by people who are not specialists. Although many people in DC are specialists or in the policy world are specialists in this particular area, whatever particular area you're writing policy in, quite a lot of people are, they have some people there, you'll get 1 or 2 people who have the deep understanding of that specific thing where they could understand all the jargon and stuff, but you have to talk to a much broader range of people to get a policy enacted, right? So you need it to be understandable people who have a good working knowledge, but maybe aren't in the weeds of the details of everything, every part of it, especially in science policy. And so it has to be understandable by non-specialists. And it needs to be really clear about what the importance of the problem is and how that policy will help address that issue And it should be reasonably evident to an educated reader when they read your couple of sentences, what, that is something that this thing that you're proposing would address the problem that you're thinking about. So that gets to the be brief part, right? And ideally you could be brief. When I say brief, I mean like one or couple of sentences, right? Or maybe a brief paragraph if you're in a longer context paper, but really you want it to be, you do not want, it's not a page to discuss your desired outcome. It's really a couple of sentences. When I was working in the Senate, one of the things I learned to do there was you have to learn to write the executive summary of the executive summary, right? So there'll be a 40-page report and it has like a 5-page executive summary. And when I was writing a memo for the senator, it would be like, you have, 5 lines at the top of a 1-page memo to get to the point about what it is that the action that's being asked and why it matters to him, right? That's what we're talking about when we say be brief. And then, the next thing is that what you're asking for should be feasible, right? The outcome should be possible with the proposed policy, and that the policy shouldn't be just wishful thinking or pie in the sky. Saying we need to fix STEM education, or we need to take a bunch of money from this department and give it to that department, or we should quadruple this budget. Those are often pie in the sky kinds of things. It might be the easiest thing to think of, but actually, that's not a specific outcome, and it's not something that's going to happen at the drop of a hat. So you need to think about what is actually feasible to do. Doesn't mean you can't push the Overton window a little, but you need to make sure it's not just like something people look at and go, oh, they're just a pipe dream, right? And so when I say people, who do I mean? So this is back to, now that gets to the next thing. This is the know your audience. Okay. So there are a couple of our happy little Venn diagram here talks about, so we have scientific evidence and data, which is the land in which most of us are comfortable, right? We've got knowledge that we've developed, we get data and evidence to bring forward. We're like, great, but that is not going to be the deciding factor as people think about whether or not they want to enact the policy that you're putting forward, because they also have to think about the social and economic infrastructure of the country, like how all of these different other moving pieces that are involved in what people need to think about as they think about implementing a public policy, enacting and implementing it. That also includes, of course, there has to be political will, right? So whether it's the White House or Congress or wherever, anything anytime you're trying to, get public policy enacted, you really need to think about there's going to be politics in the situation. You don't have to be the people who deal with the politics, but you have to think about them as you're trying to get people on board with your idea. So public policy, happens at the intersection space between these 3 overlapping things. And to keep in mind as you think about that so science, which includes, and I'm using science writ broadly, so like data, evidence, right? That's rarely going to be the deciding factor when you write legislation or make policy, because there's always going to be a bunch of different competing axes. So I think about, people think, okay, kind of X and Y. I think this is actually a much more 3-dimensional problem. So here's your science and data, right? That's one axis. But then you have economics, economic impact. You have ideology, political ideology, other kinds of ideology, not necessarily political, that go into these things. Politics, not one-to-one correspondence with ideology, although obviously related, but political considerations, whether it's local or national, right? Whether you're trying to do something on a short time scale or a long time scale. And then personal priorities of the people who the enactors, right? So that could be, like I said, again, it could be White House, it could be federal agencies, it could be federal agency leadership, it could be congressional folks, right? But there are, kind of personal or institutional priorities. Maybe I should have put this one more axis there, which is institutional priorities, right? What an institution that is going to enact something sees as high up on its list of things that it wants to do, right? Some of those are rational and understandable. Not all of them are. Some of them are supported by evidence. Again, not all of them are, but they're all vital to a policy decision because, public policy is fundamentally a human activity, right? So it doesn't all mean, not everything is determined by how rational something is or logical it is. The main thing is that, you want science to be in the room when decisions are made, right? There's a whole universe of factors that matter. But it's one of the successes of science policy, or when it's being effective, when the writing is effective, when the presentation is effective, is that science is part of the conversation when policies and laws are formulated and decisions are made. But the data, the evidence, that is actually being under consideration, right? along with all of these other factors. And so we have to have people in the room who have an understanding of the science and the data, the evidence, and have a commitment to using that in the process in this mix of to nudge policy choices in directions that are supported by evidence, right? And so that is why there's a whole bunch of persuasion in this, right? There's a lot of psychological studies about persuasion and understanding and how you get people to kind of come on board with your ideas. So that gets to the know your audience. What's been for policy writing to be compelling, you need to think about who are you trying to convince to take action? Who are the stakeholders? Who is the audience for what you're writing, right? This can depend on the medium you're using to communicate as well. So like if you're talking to people versus writing a long policy position paper versus writing a short memo or a one pager or an op-ed, or if you're publishing in a journal, or if you're, all of those things are part of who you're communicating with, because who's going to read that the place that you're writing the thing, right? How do you connect what you're offering to their interest, right? Their interest as a policymaker, as an elected official, as a federal official, whatever, or state, like I said, state and local, if you're doing this in the state and local level. You need to put those things first when you're thinking about policy, rather than developing a policy argument from where you're comfortable or your own perspective. Because the point is you say, oh, you think this is sort of self-evident, but it isn't. So unlike when you're writing papers for a journal or a conference, you're probably not talking to people who are already convinced that what you're talking about is important. So you can't default to a framing argument that would work for us or for our scientific community, right? That's the thing you have to make sure. If you're defending your thesis or doing whatever, giving a talk, the people you're talking to are already convinced that that subject matter is important, even if they're going to challenge you on the particulars, right? But you could be talking in policy to people who are not necessarily convinced that the thing that you're talking about is important. So you have to put yourself in their place and think about what connects to what they're interested in. And one of the things, I'm just a little slight aside here, right, is that thinking about putting ourselves in our place, ourselves in other people's places is actually part of what we should be doing in science anyway. As we think about science as maybe the search for truth, right? But as best as we understand it, supported by evidence and facts, but the way we practice science is embedded in the fabric of society. Society's paying for us to do science, right? So we have an obligation to society to consider ethics, to consider history, to consider other influences, so that societal structures have and take them into account. Because we need to integrate the science in the life of society to maximize benefit to people and minimize harms, right? And it's erupted in astronomy under the kind of the use of the location on Mauna Kea on the Big Island of Hawaii for putting telescopes. That it became a fight about kind of that was related to a long history of colonization and oppression in Hawaii of the native interests there and their culture. And so that the telescopes became a flashpoint for that. So understanding how what we do impacts the rest of society and how we need to think about that holistically is understanding that science is not divorceable from society, right? We are part of society, and that's what we need to think about as we are thinking about connecting to the interests of people who want to make policy. Okay, so bottom line up front. So most people, most of the time, reason more like lawyers than scientists, which is to say they don't go, and we don't do this either, but ideally we try to go in free of preconceptions, but most people have an idea in their head, a preconception in their head first, and then, they go in and they use the evidence that they find to build the case that, kind of supports their conclusions. You see that in politics a lot, right? In science, in theory, we don't go in with preconceptions, although we have priors, and we try to then see where the evidence leads us, right? We need that kind of training. We need people who are trained to think like scientists, to start with evidence and then follow the data to a conclusion. You start with a hypothesis and maybe you're disproving it, or maybe you're proving it, but you're willing to have that disproven, right? And we need that in policy development and writing. However, the way we write about this in science is kind of, we're going to have to unlearn some of it for policy. So in academic or scientific writing, we do it this way, right? We have an abstract, short but technical abstract. We write a background of what the problem is. We write about our observations and our experiment and how that goes. We write an analysis, right? And then we get to the conclusion, the key takeaways, right? And we're like, and usually the part of the key takeaways is more data is needed, right? Which means you never get to the end of the problem. which is good in science, but in policy, by the way, you actually have to do something based on the amount of data and information you have. You can't just always punt it, right? So, but that's a structure that's more or less like this, right? You build a case and all this stuff, and eventually at the end of it, you get to the point, right? You get to the point, and then that's what people understand. However, in policy writing, you kind of need to do it in the other direction, right? You need to think journalistically. So let me back up a little, oops. So you need to have a short and clear statement of your goal and objective and an ask at the top. So that was what I was saying, bottom line up front, right? So that would be something that maybe it would be in the, you think of it as the key takeaways in your academic writing, but we need to do it the other way around, right? And then you could have the background or context, which is the hook that connects it to the person you're talking to, statement of the problem, why is it urgent? And then what are the how are the policies that you're asking for in the ask, how do those address the problem, right? And then finally, you have illustrative stories and examples and supporting evidence and data that kind of buttress what you're asking for, which is basically a structure that is the opposite of how you do your academic writing. You start with the point, and then you build out the mountain underneath, right? And that seems like it takes a while to learn to do that. But honestly, I think we all understand this, because don't we all in our academic, read academic papers, don't we all read the abstract and then skip to the conclusions and then go back to the analysis and background and all that stuff afterwards? Because I think we do, right? So, one could make the argument that maybe academic writing could use a bit of an overhaul, but either way, this is one of the things when the bottom line up front that you have to sort of retrain yourself to do. So who makes federal policy? This is there's some basic stuff, 50,000 foot view, right? The Congress writes the laws, sets the budget, agencies hammer out the policy details and do policy implementation. And so, this is all at the federal level. There are analogies at the state level, right? So this is all 50,000 foot view stuff. When you get to the agencies, you can get into the details. There's some places are micromanaged, and some places there's a lot of interpretation, right? So those are the people who you're trying to get to take action if you're thinking about federal policy. So that means you need to think about policy levers, and that's, what are the right tools for the job, depending on what policy is being proposed and who you're acting to ask or implement, right? And there's often multiple levers that can be used to achieve what your outcome that you want. And it often takes multiple levers to actually achieve the goal. So different actors in the ecosystem have different levers on which they can act, right? The White House has a set of tools, Congress has a set, federal agencies have a set. And keep in mind that all actions don't have to happen all at once or at all in order to make meaningful progress towards the ultimate goal. Improving a situation, making things somewhat better, moving yourself down the road to the goal that you want is an important achievement that matters. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so here's some examples. You can create a new entity or program. You can expand an existing one. You can reform processes, practices, and definitions. You can set a goal, a measurable goal, and propose a metric to evaluate progress towards that goal. You could adopt a specific new or revised policy. You can rescind an existing policy. Repealing certain policies that exist is also a policy lever. Developing or upgrading infrastructure, physical or otherwise. Developing or revising regulations. Form or promoting partnerships, could be public-private, could be different parts of government, all different kinds of things. Redirecting existing resources, and then of course there's the old favorite, proposing new resources, giving us new money. And let me just say though, that's like, if people too often go right to give us new money and give us new resources, that's not enough, right? And frequently that's one of the most difficult levers to move, whereas these other things are actually easier. Not easy, just easier. So don't just go with the obvious. And there are blunt hammers and there are fine chisels in policy. There are two different multiple scales of action. So you need to choose and propose wisely. So then the next thing is how do you make things connect to your audience? We're kind of coming in for landing. And so how do you get your signal above the noise? Because there's a ton of information in the policy world and everybody has very limited bandwidth, right? And you need to get their attention and you need to get their interest, right? So you need to make your argument memorable and relevant. And you can do that by using representative narratives and stories along with data and the facts. So I like to think of it as like science and data as kind of you're starting off with an elegant building that you're making, right? And data, in fact, are the foundation, the underlying infrastructure of this internal structure of this building that you're creating for this policy building. But what makes the edifice attractive and noteworthy and memorable to somebody who's looking at it are the details, right? The details are what draw the eye, that lead people to appreciate the whole of the structure and to later on remember it in their head. And that's where the examples and the stories and the narratives are the fine details that can make something memorable for those you're communicating with, right? And that's true for specialists and non-specialists alike. But honestly, it works for us too as scientists and people in this field, that we glom onto something that is relevant to us so that we find memorable, right? So what it tells you is that narratives and examples won't be equally effective for all the different stakeholders, right? So think about what the interests and priorities of the audience that you're talking to, the stakeholder they're talking to, and select an example or a story that's relatable and relevant for them. And keep in mind that doesn't mean that we're talking about anecdata, right? It's not cherry picking favorable points. You want to pick examples and stories that are typical, not outliers, but they're tailored for the people you're communicating. So think of it like illustration. And a simple example is like, if you're talking about climate policies to bend the curve on climate change, you would think about climate impacts that are relevant to the stakeholder they're talking to. Maybe one audience is more interested in floods, another audience is more used to thinking about sea level rise problems, another audience is thinking about agricultural impacts, right? So these are all ways to illustrate the policy that you're talking about, but not without kind of making it memorable for them, even if it's the policy is one that thinks about all of those things. So you need to describe the impact and benefits that the proposed policy would have for society and people beyond practitioners of science, for the entities or the priorities of most interest of the stakeholders that you're talking to, and really for how you think the policy could make the world a better place, right? The point is to place yourself in the position of your audience, your stakeholder, and write an argument that will be persuasive to them. And that's often quite different, both in form and content, from what would be persuasive to you or to your colleagues or fellow scientists, academics, or organizations. And that, again, need to make sure that your information is accurate, brief, and clear, and understandable by these non-specialists. So think plain English, right, as you're right. So I'll leave you with a couple of final thoughts about how is policy like science. Policy is, because I find there's actually a lot of analogies. Most of the time we make incremental progress towards a goal, right? In policy as well as in science. And in science, this often refines small refinements. And in our case, more accurate, little tiny changes, accuracy and measurement. In policy space, it could be small tweaks to language in laws or policies. Every now and then there's a eureka moment where you have a big breakthrough, right? And you have a major discovery or a significant legislation or, new policy in each of these two worlds, right? But, I think that means that we should understand better than most why it's not a fast process, right? You do a lot of small changes, incremental improvements before you get to some kind of big change. So we can't be surprised when it takes a long time to really make a sea change in policy. But we also should understand, because as in science, some progress towards the goal, right, is an improvement and it's an achievement. And that's true in science, and it's also true in policy. So finally, I'll just say that science and science policy needs you, right? Science doesn't speak for itself. And if we value it, we want the country to value it, we have to speak for it. And its value compared to other competing demands is not always self-evident to everybody else in the universe. So your subject matter and expertise and critical thinking skills are important. And I'd say your subject matter expertise is valuable, but your critical thinking skills are invaluable, right? Because we need this. We need these abilities to think, to look at data and understand it, and to evaluate it rigorously, to recognize limitations and biases in information, to understand that there are a lot of variables and you can't control for all of them at once. So you have to make choices about what to prioritize and what to pursue, and then understand the implications of those choices. To look at a problem and come up with good questions to ask that will set us on the road to being able to solve the problem or make progress towards addressing it. To take in a lot of complex, disparate, and detailed information without getting overwhelmed, and to use that to chart a course forward and to enjoy doing it, right? These are all fundamental attributes of being a scientist, but it's also exactly what we need in science policy. And I will end and stop sharing.
Dr. Bandyopadhyay, that was exceptional. Thank you so much for sharing just such a broad swath of wisdom. It was truly one of the best writing workshops I've ever attended. And I feel grateful that such a international leader would give up her time to welcome this group into this world. I wanted to provide our APS outgoing chair of the Forum of Physics and Society, Dr. Henry Kelly, to say a few words of thanks as well.
Well, I certainly want to thank you. I've heard a lot of talks on how to write for science policy, and this is without exception the best I've ever heard, so thank you. I'm a former AAAS fellow, so I'm always delighted to see a former fellow make good. But particularly being on the recipient end of policy papers for many years, your argument that you start off by writing down what it is you're proposing, what are you trying to do, and why should I care? And the idea of having to go to page 8 to figure that out is just absurd. And so I just wish there was some way that a broader group of scientists could get access to the wisdom of the material you presented. So, but I'm delighted that we were able to benefit from it today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We are now moving into our breakout rooms. We have 2 additional policy experts who have joined us. Let me remove your spotlight, Reva. Mr. Ivan Kanapathy and Dr. Divyansh Kaushik will, alongside Dr. Bandyopadhyay, be leading these small group discussions. I wanted to briefly introduce our additional policy experts and then hand over the microphone to them to provide just 2 additional minutes of background and their role today. Let me start with Mr. Kanapathy, who serves as adjunct professor of Georgetown University, as well as vice president of Beacon Global Strategies, LLC. Prior to joining BGS, Mr. Kanapathy was a career military officer and foreign affairs practitioner focused on the Indo-Pacific region. From March 2018 to July 2021, Mr. Kanapathy served on the White House's National Security Council staff as Deputy Senior Director for Asian Affairs and Director for China, Taiwan, and Mongolia. In this capacity, he advised the President and National Security Advisor and led U.S. government interagency policy development and implementation on U.S. relations with China and Taiwan, covering diplomatic, military, cyber, health, technology, investment, and other related issues. As a military attaché at the American Institute in Taiwan from 2014 to 2017, Mr. Kanapathy represented U.S. interests and advised top U.S. and Taiwanese officials on cross-strait military and security issues. During this time, he worked closely with the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, informing and shaping relevant operational contingency plans and key leader engagements. Mr. Kanapathy, did I also see on LinkedIn that you were a Top Gun instructor in Nevada?
I was, yeah. That was a while ago now, but yes.
That's just an extraordinary opportunity to learn from your many areas of expertise. I wanted to hand the microphone to you to provide a few more minutes, 2 more minutes of background.
Yeah, no, thanks, Julianne. I'll keep it brief. I think she hit, I'm sure, all the highlights. I think Julianne knows this, I was a physics major for my bachelor's, and I think that it was great. I loved it, but that was sort of the end of it for me as like an actual science practitioner, if you'd even call it that. But since then, sort of, used it a lot. I think my background is very helpful, on that side in the flying world. For one, I flew F-18s for a lot of years, and the understanding of our weapon systems and our sensors and just aviation in general, very important. And then obviously I kind of vectored into the policy world, as Julianne was talking about, but also I've done a lot of, or been involved with a lot of science and technology policy here at the White House, or here in Washington when I was at the White House in recent years. But I'll pause there and turn it back over to you, Julianne.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Great
much,
to be
Mr.
here.
Oh, it's an absolute privilege. We are additionally lucky to have another policy expert, also based in Washington, D.C., Dr. Divyansh Kaushik, who serves as Associate Director for Emerging Technologies and National Security Policy at the Federation of American Scientists. He holds a PhD from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where he focused on designing reliable artificial intelligence systems that align with human values. He has worked with Congress on several legislative efforts around STEM workforce, innovation, and creating a 21st century national security innovation base, including the recently passed CHIPS and Science Act. In addition to his work on Capitol Hill advocating for defense, science, innovation, and immigration issues, he has also played a key role in the establishment of the Congressional Graduate Research and Development Caucus. He's also a frequent contributor to leading publications, including National Defense Magazine, The Dispatch, Daily Caller, and Forbes, sharing his insights and expertise on a variety of topics relevant to national security and innovation. Dr. Kaushik, it was a pleasure to meet you in person at the recent AAAS meeting, where for the crowd, Dr. Kaushik had a group of onlookers and fans wherever you went. I think I never saw you walking alone without sharing your insights into the policy world. So wanted to hand it over to you for a couple of minutes to share with this group now.
Thanks, Julianne. It's hard to follow Ivan here, but I'll try my best. I think you hit everything here. Yeah, I'm just glad to be here. I've worked on a couple of issues, but like that has brought me to a place where I've been able to apply the perspectives from my research all the way to issues that I knew nothing about when I was doing a PhD. But the one thing that I've learned, and that Dr. Bandyopadhyay also hit on in her talk, was about looking at who your customer is, and always trying to make sure that you're trying to make their job easier. So I'm happy to be here and share whatever little wisdom I might have.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's truly an honor to showcase such an exceptional panel of experts. For those of you who have not attended a JSPG writing workshop, how this will work moving forward for the next 42 minutes is we will separate into breakout rooms. You'll see in the chat, I just placed a shared document with 3 different tabs focused on AI and global security, which Dr. Kaushik will be leading, climate change and global security, which Dr. Bandyopadhyay will be leading, and biosecurity and global security, which Mr. Kanapathy will be leading. So you have the opportunity to change groups. I'm going to assign you randomly, and you have an opportunity within those first few seconds and minutes to change to another group. There is in the chat the discussion prompts and notes. If you would like to stay in touch with your fellow participants after this event, please do include your name and email address, as well as your prioritized list of interests, and we are glad to connect you by email after the fact. If there are any questions, please do feel free to stay here in the main room where I will be. Both our JSPG ambassadors, Leila Chiddick and Bipin Kumar, will be joining 2 of our experts to be their note takers. Thank you so much once again to our experts, and enjoy time in the breakout rooms. You'll have about 32 minutes before I call you all back at 52 minutes after the hour to provide a full group share out. Enjoy the time, and we appreciate all of you being here. You should see an invitation to the breakout rooms now. Wonderful. Henry and Anna, I have not assigned you to breakout rooms. Anna, I know that you're in a client meeting at the moment. Henry, would you like me to place you in any of the breakout rooms?
Trying to figure out.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I know that half an hour does not seem like enough to solve the world's problems, especially in a topic like global security, but I appreciate your efforts nonetheless. I know that most of us wanted to be in all breakout room discussions if we possibly could have. So in an effort to live vicariously through others' discussions, I wanted to offer each of our three policy experts some 2 minutes or so to provide a share out of kind of the key insights. Mr. Kanapathy, may I start with you on biosecurity?
Yeah, we'll start, but we had some really great participants. We had Henry Kelly from APS, and then we had Christina, who I think worked on the Hill recently, and then we had Lewis Grant, who's actually a biologist, and I'm going to turn it over to Lewis to kind of summarize where we got through the discussion, which again, wish we had more time, but thanks so much. Lewis, over to you.
All right, I'm going to try to keep this brief. So our background problem was the U.S. government act in response to emerging global biological and medical threats, both naturally occurring and non-naturally occurring. We identified lots of stakeholders to be involved, which include the U.S. intelligence community, the broader public community, international and non-governmental organizations, foreign nations that we'll need to collaborate with, and private organizations. We determined that the stakeholders that should act on the problem immediately should be the intelligence community. But the landscape was that we have a lack of inter-Asian cooperation between members of the IC due to just disjointed mission sets and priorities. And to address that, we came up with several policy options. First, we need to urge the prioritization of two IC agencies on biological threats, and to coordinate their efforts. A mission center through the DNI would allow each member of the IC to undertake what mission set they are best at and report back and share their information within each other.
Do you want to wrap up with just another sentence or two?
Oh, God.
I know. welcome to policy.
Another issue we ran into on more of the civilian side or non-Title 50 side was that a lot of the stakeholders may have trouble interfacing with Title 50 agencies who have security clearances. Members of the NIH, CDC, and FDA often don't have security clearances. And so getting them briefed in is something that needs to be examined, and maybe accelerated security clearance processes need to be brought to the forefront as an issue before we can move into this kind of broader collection and effort by the US government.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for representing your discussion group, especially on such an ambitious topic as biosecurity. I'd like to now hand it over to Dr. Kaushik to provide a share out of your discussion.
Great, thanks, Julianne. So we had a great group of participants, and I'm gonna tap one of them to give the readout as well. But I think there are a lot of interesting problems in this space to address, especially with the recent White House actions on export controls around high-end semiconductor chips going to China, etc. But we came up with a very interesting topic. There are a lot of firms outside the United States that are using AI to design counterfeits of say PPEs that are developed in the US, and then they ship them to the US for the market. So how can our agencies also use AI and predictive technologies to identify that counterfeit product coming in, identify that fraud? And Leila, I will ask you to brief the group on what solution you came up with and why.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Kaushik, for leading our group. So our problem to be addressed was looking at CBP or DHS or other federal agencies and how they can utilize predictive technologies to detect fraud. Specifically, we talked a lot about COVID-19 fraud and counterfeit respirators. Our stakeholders were agency leads, companies, procurement officers, Congress, FinCEN, trade groups. We have a lot of stakeholders. And we thought that DHS or CBP or procurement officers or OMB could work on or should act on the problem. We came up with 3 sort of solutions. One being creating a
Would you like to highlight one, perhaps? We're running
procurement.
very short of time.
So
Thank you.
in 30 seconds, reach out to DHS for a procurement program and using OTA.
Yeah. So
And
just to add on to that, why OTA?
Because no congressional action is needed, and it allows for more more urgent media response. If I got that right.
Yes, and Air Force is incredible at using OTAs. So, other agencies can really learn from them on how to not go through the normal procurement channels and get some technologies urgently.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Layla, for stepping up and representing, and to Dr. Kaushik for leading that wonderful discussion. Dr. Bandyopadhyay, if you would please drive us home with the final share out of your discussion group on climate change.
Sure. I'll just say that it was an interesting discussion that in fact went kind of broader than climate change. I mean, it started with the climate change which is crazy, right? Because climate change is broad, but actually it went to kind of a more fundamental problem that affects not just climate change research, but the research enterprise, which is that they're needing to reduce the time lag between the output of research and kind of academic research and its uptake, how that data and evidence has an uptake in the policymaking sector. And so how that there was that the Obama administration kind of came up with an estimate of it taking about 17 years for stuff to get the diffusion timescale, and the problem statement was, how do you shorten that to 5 years? Right, the lag between those things. And so the group came up with sort of 2 thoughts about kind of policy options to address that. One would be to create a dedicated structure in the government that would be a translation space to bridge the gap, so that an office of some type, for example, that would be staffed by people who can speak, who know, kind of are connected into the research ecosystem, and can bring that information forward but they're part of the government, and then they would be able to help transmit and have conduits for that research, the outputs of it and the importance of it to various actors within the government space who need the information more quickly. And that would, kind of instead of it having be sort of an ad hoc process with a bunch of different papers and all the kinds of things that we do now to get it out there, to actually create a space that was dedicated to that purpose. The other one is that to do a better job of teaching academics and teaching in the academic space to help the people coming out into the academic space, new trainees and so forth, to be able to be prepared to communicate better with policymakers and others, to understand how to avoid things like misunderstandings around uncertainty in science. And of course, that's not something that you do in a federal context, but we identified places like the National Academies who write kind of these overarching reports to help guide the academic enterprise into a new direction. So those are the 2 things that they came up with.
Intriguing idea. I am on board. Let me know when I can sign a petition. Thank you, everyone. Truly, it's a minute after the hour, so I wanted to ever so briefly plug the next opportunity to engage in the American Physical Society Journal of Science Policy and Governance special issue events happening in 2 weeks on March 21st, moderated by APS Forum of Physics and Society outgoing chair, Dr. Henry Kelly, with 2 extraordinary leaders akin to the level of leadership that we've seen during today's workshop. As I mentioned before, this video will be posted to the JSPG YouTube video. We will also provide a follow-up email with links to be able to follow the extraordinary work of our experts today on LinkedIn and other social media channels. Thank you, experts, once again, for giving of your time so generously today to be able to open this window into the world of global security, policy, and governance. It truly was a dream roster, and we can't thank you enough. Thank you to our APS leaders, Dr. Kelly and Dr. Kiter. Thank you to my JSPG ambassadors, Layla Chittick and Vipin Kumar. And thank you to you, attendees and participants. We are grateful to be surrounded by a community that cares so deeply about these topics, to give of your time on a busy week, undoubtedly. So with that, I will conclude today's workshop, and we look forward to staying in touch. We really appreciate your participation today.